RhythmAnd Soul Radio. I am Marco Nobles. We have our guest line open, and we have a very special guest with us. He is someone who served as the personal assistant for the legendary Luther Vandross for many years. And he's also founded an organization called Divabetic, which we will talk about in just a bit, as it is inspired through his work with Luther Vandross. But first, let me welcome Max Szadek to our virtual studio. What's happening, sir? How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me join you tonight. I really appreciate it.
Really appreciate you being here. It was a pleasure getting to meet you. We got to meet when we were working on the screening in Marcus Garvey Park in Harlem for the documentary Luther Never Too Much back in September. And of course, that now many people are hearing a lot more about the film as it has been released in selected locations around the country, and will have a full release on CNN as it was just announced on January 1st. So first, talk about the film, the documentary, your involvement in it, because it was very, I'm sure it was very emotional for you and everybody close to Mr. Vandross.
Well, first, I thought the screening you held up in Harlem was amazing at Marcus Garvey Park. I just love the energy and the excitement, and all the live performances, including the Q&A, were amazing. So hats off to you.
Thank you.
It's been a long time coming. I was involved really early on in the documentary. They called me, I guess, as one of the first people to kind of get a sense of where they wanted to go with the film. Dawn Porter, the director, and her team. And then last year I got a call as they were rounding things out to go to the studio and do an interview about Luther. And I have to say, my portion, which we're going to talk about probably in a minute, really dealt with Luther's stroke related to mismanaged type 2 diabetes. And they really specifically wanted me to tell them about that experience. But I just have to tell you, it was a thrill and an honor to even be asked. And it's been kind of an amazing year because the film, I believe, debuted at the Sundance Festival in January. And I don't know, it's just been an incredible experience for people to look back at your life and want to hear what was happening, that Luther's still so revered, and just that work was so important for so many reasons, that it's just an honor to be able to tell the story about a wonderful, generous, funny man he was, and obviously what a big talent.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, it was, there were so many honors about the night where we did the screening back in September. A highlight, obviously, being able to talk with you and hear stories about Luther Vandross, but also being able to do a Q&A with Dawn Porter, the film's producer, and Fonzie Thornton, Luther's best friend. I mean, there was so much to learn about Luther from this documentary, so I won't give it away because, hopefully everybody will see it multiple times. But just being able to, it's one of the few screenings that I've done where we've done the performances and the Soul Train line, and then, because all of that is so much, and then to sit and watch the film, and it was really special to be able to sit and really watch the film and really take in, because we grew up with Luther, and we were all so saddened and really devastated when he had his stroke and then when he finally transitioned. But to be able to relive so many of the moments and so many of the things that went on in his life and therefore went on in our lives was really amazing.
I like to just say that I thought one of the things that the film did well, and there are a lot of them, was just kind of capture his drive and determination to succeed. I think most fans out there think all the doors opened for Luther the minute he opened his mouth and sang his first note. But the reality, and I'm not giving anything away, but the reality was he faced a lot of disappointment and setbacks before he kind of arrived at that first solo album and the success of that. And for that reason, I think it's an incredible inspirational story that new and old fans could really wrap their arms around, and just how important it is to believe in yourself. And I think that's one of the biggest things I ever took away from working with Luther Vandross was the drive. You have to work hard. Obviously, he was a hard worker. You have to be very meticulous in how you go after your craft, whatever that is, but also this undenying belief in yourself.
Absolutely. And what's really, fascinating watching the film and then reflecting, Luther, has passed away. It's been, almost 20 years now, and so it's almost like a whole new generation of fans now, or a whole new generation now can be educated on Luther Vandross, and it seems like yesterday still that he was just here.
It's so true. I think you represent this really magical moment in music that is unfortunately not around or prevalent as much today. I mean, he was right before hip hop came out, and I just think that romantic elegance of Luther Vandross is incredible. And I should mention to your fans that right now, for the next 6 months at the Grammy Museum, there's a Luther Vandross Artistry and Elegance exhibit. Now that exhibit has a lot of the costumes, memorabilia, a few candid interviews, as well as some behind the scenes, some more performances that people might not have been able to see. And I was lucky to be involved in that as well. So that's at the Grammy Museum in LA running through June 2025.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was certainly going to bring that up. Another thing, now you worked with Luther Vandross for how long?
13 years. I started in 1993 on the Never Let Me Go tour. I was in the wardrobe department, and then I became his assistant in 1995, right at the Royal Albert Hall video. If you watch that with Mariah Carey, I was at that show, and that's where I transitioned to the assistant. And then I stayed on as Luther's full-time caregiver after he had the stroke in 2003 until his passing in 2005.
And you mentioned, and this is something that I think you mentioned, and you mentioned in the film, that you were the one to actually find him when he had his stroke.
I was, and I could only talk about that because I went on to do diabetes outreach. But I have a family history of diabetes. My grandmother had diabetes. I was never sure if it was type 1 or type 2. I knew Luther did have diabetes. I thought it was being managed through pills. I was never really asking him questions about his diabetes. And I realized, one of the issues or mistakes I would say is that he had like about 50 people, Marcus, on the road supporting him with his music. But when it came to managing his diabetes, he did it alone. And over the last 20 years of doing diabetes advocacy, I realized how important it is to have your entourage of care around you, which is, of course, your healthcare collaborators, providers, friends, and family. Because there's ups and downs. It's a grind. There's a lot of emotions tied to diabetes. And there's a lot of times people just want to give up or throw their hands up. And I think it's really important that you have a support network around you encouraging you with that.
Right. And out of that process of working with him and watching him, deal with and not deal with his diabetes, you created Divabetic. So talk about that, because in a way that's kind of like a legacy to Luther as well, right?
I hope so. Thank you for saying that. It's intended to be. I just felt like I was in a position where I could have possibly, had I been educated, stop that. I mean, for me, Marcus, the big question when I was working with Luther, and at the time of the stroke, when we rushed him to the emergency room, the doctor came out and said to me, Max, this could have been avoided. I mean, it was literally within minutes of bringing him into emergency. And imagine the escalated emotions of just the heightened realization of bringing Luther to emergency. And then moments after the stretcher goes in, this man comes out and said, oh, it could have been avoided. I had no idea at that moment that diabetes could be so devastating, the effects of mismanaged diabetes. I was led to believe, like many people, it's a touch of sugar. oh, you don't really have to worry about it. You know, it takes care of itself in its own way. You could pray it away or whatever people say. And in that moment, I realized, unfortunately, with much regret, that we should have been watching the guardrails. And everyone knows that Luther had a very public battle with his weight. It's well documented in the documentary as well as in many articles. And so, you know, for a lot of people who have weight management issues where they're not happy with the numbers they see on the scale, that's another precursor for why you might choose not to manage your diabetes in the best type of management. And so at that point, when Luther had the stroke, he had gained considerable weight. He wasn't, I think he was just kind of denial about the care that he needed. And that's unfortunately leading to the stroke. And then the reality too about this story is he lived alone. And so I came in the following morning. We've never been able to determine how long he was on the floor before I found him. And so I think, you know, it's also very important for anyone who lives alone that they have some kind of precautionary information set up that people around them could help them in case there's some kind of crisis.
Absolutely. It's Rhythm and Soul Radio. We are talking with Max Szadek, who is the former assistant for the legendary Luther Vandross. He is also featured in the documentary Luther Never Too Much. And he has founded an organization called Divabetic, which is providing information on diabetes, stroke outreach, etc., and information and education. So I want to talk more about, well, two things. One, you mentioned that we all know the struggles that Luther had with his weight, and obviously how that affected his health and diabetes. But that was something that was never really talked about, you know, amongst, even though there was a lot of conversation, I guess, about his weight, whether he had it or others may have had it with him, or it will come up in interviews or what have you, or even comedy bits. But there was never a conversation about how it impacted his health, right?
I don't agree with that. I think his doctors definitely had the conversation. I mean, Luther was very guarded and very protective, and certainly the weight was a very touchy subject. In the time that I worked for him, I'd say he gained and lost 100 pounds with 6 times, and we're talking about going from 200 pounds to 300 plus pounds. I was the one who got him involved in step aerobics because I thought the choreography and the movement of step aerobics would be something that would engage him mentally, that he could do something physically. And up to that point, he was not, when he was doing weight loss, he had done like the liquid diet. He wasn't using any kind of physical activity for weight loss. It was all really monitoring calories. And he had a very strong all or nothing approach to dieting, meaning when he was on the diet, he had a very strict thing. And when he fell off the diet, it was everything, you know, there's no middle ground there. And so moderation doesn't work for everyone, but that certainly is a lesson I learned from Luther. And because there's so many emotions tied to this, it's not that you can't be a certain shape or size and not manage your diabetes. I would never say that. It's also the emotional component tied to your shape and size that may prohibit you from wanting to give yourself proper care. And, you know, a lot of us, life gets in the way of doing anything, especially your health. And so I always tell people, if you're listening to his music, you owe it to yourself to listen to your body. And see, at Divabetic, I've always tried to present things like a Luther concert, make it fun and entertaining, use live music, use captivating speakers, put information into little sound bites rather than an A to Z lecture, and take those traditional messaging and put it into games and other things to make it more fun to learn about. Because it, you know, we're very disconnected from our bodies today. And so the idea that your body's not working or your body has somehow failed you with a diagnosis of diabetes, I think is much harder to accept than people realize. And, you know, pre-diabetes, which is a precursor to type 2 diabetes, is so prevalent today. There's like 79 million people who have pre-diabetes. and most of them don't even know they have it. They haven't been checked yet for it. I'm high at risk with a family history of both type 1 and type 2, so I get checked every time I go in for my physical.
Right. You mentioned Divabetic is to really kind of make it fun and not I guess preach to people, but talk about some of the different things and different events that you do within Divabetic to help get the word out about how you can care for yourself and it not be a chore.
Well, you know, I do monthly podcasts. I work with Sony to present different topics related to some of the musical acts we've used throughout the years, compliments of Sony. I've done videos, but I was just recently told that people love the one-on-one support that we offer. And so I'm thinking, I haven't been doing support meetings since the pandemic because obviously people with prediabetes are at a higher rate with COVID of having some kind of risk factor there. So I stopped doing that, but I'm thinking maybe I just need to get back to grassroots and go back to doing small support meetings on a monthly basis, because I do think the power is in realizing that you're not alone, that those issues that you're dealing with, whether you're sitting next to a bank teller or a professional athlete or someone who's just completely different than you are, the similarity and the commonality of trying to manage your blood sugars, your blood pressure, your emotions, and everything else related to diabetes, your heart health, is something that could link people together. And it just helps to know that it's doable and that you can have the right attitude, because you have to advocate for yourself in today's world around your health. You can't take a back seat. You really need to, takes a lot of energy. You probably know that. You could speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely work, and it's definitely, stick-to-itiveness that you need to continue to manage your health. But it's all worth it when you do it. And there is a way to have a balance.
And there's a lot of shame and I just want to interrupt for a minute. The shame and blame is also a huge issue, and we really work hard to tackle that, because you have to. A lot of people blame themselves for why this happened to them. One day they were fine, the next day they woke up. They're not as physically active as they were as a teenager. They've gained some weight. They're just mentally just not, they're not aware that they're always tired, blah, blah, blah. And I understand that. I've heard that conversation many times, but unfortunately at that place is where you have to kind of get back on your feet and start really advocating for yourself, and not just kind of blaming and shaming yourself for like, why? It's fine to have those conversations. I think it's really important, but then you have to ultimately begin to take some small steps to make a change. And that's why like certain tools like Mounjaro, Wegovy, Ozempic were not available for Luther. I think they would have been a huge help. I think we're beginning to see if people have obsessive thinking around food, addictive natures around foods and carbohydrates or salt, fat, and sugar, that these are tools that might work for them, and they should consult people and do their own research on it.
Absolutely. What I was going to say is you use music quite a bit as a tool with Divabetic, and that for a number of reasons. You've been around music so much, but you also are an artist and songwriter yourself.
I am. I'm so happy. One of the challenges I gave myself was like, I'm surrounded by so much incredible talent with the Luther folks. We all do stay in touch. And so I kind of tapped a lot of the singers and producers in the group as a lyricist to see if they would partner with me. So over the years, I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with Ivan Hampton Jr. and Paulette McWilliams and Cindy Mizell. And I'm working with Pat Lacey, and I just did a little work with Lisa Fisher on some different songs. And I know that isn't available to everyone, but I do think the lesson in all of that is like, if you really want to do something, you should ask your friends if they'll help you out. And thankfully, you're going to play a song that I wrote. Two women, Crystal Blackman Wilson and Penny Wilson. Crystal's daughter is Shanice Wilson, which I'm sure people will be familiar with. And they knew Luther Vandross. And so I met them several years ago on tour, and we stayed in touch, and we've written many songs together. We had a song out on the UK soul charts last year called Standards, and this is going to be our follow-up. And I of course wanted to do something high energy because, you know, I believe in moving your body. You got to put something on that motivates you to do it.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into that. And Max, let me ask you to remind everybody how they can get more information about Divabetic and reach out to you, website, or whatever it is.
Absolutely. We're official Divabetic on Instagram. We're on Facebook with a Divabetic group and a page. And we also have a website, divabetic.org. And it's Diva, Divabetic. Luther loved the divas. So what inspired me really was Pat LaBelle, who was a good friend of Luther Vandross. She was at a tribute concert in New York right after Luther suffered the stroke. And she was, I believe, singing Power of Love, and she stopped the song and she said to the audience, I have diabetes, but diabetes doesn't have me. And in that moment, I realized, because she was talking about it, I looked at the stage and I was like, wow, she's a diva, not a diabetic. And then I put it together and made Divabetic and realized the V stood for Vandross. And so with that, I began to slowly educate myself around diabetes and slowly work grassroots. I did some stuff up at the Apollo. I'm in New York City, so I did a lot of fairs and things like that and began to put programs together. And then I was really fortunate in like 2006 to 2009 to go around the country presenting diabetes outreach called Divabetic Makeover Your Diabetes, which was the idea of taking traditional education out of the hospital setting, mixing it with makeover experiences, and presenting it in a fun new way. And so I got a chance to outreach to all the Luther fans and their family members, both men and women, and just help them renew their attitude.
That's excellent. We've been talking with Max Szadek, who is the founder of Divabetic, also former assistant to the legendary Luther Vandross. The film, Luther, Never Too Much, the documentary, is amazing, and everybody will be able to see it come January 1st, excuse me, on CNN. But prior to that, I believe, I think it's mid-December, there's going to be a special screening at the Apollo Theater. So everybody can look out for that as well. And if you're able to make that in the New York City area, then please do. It's an amazing film. It's an amazing story, and just, you know, rekindles your love for everything Luther Vandross. But certainly make sure you watch it on New Year's Day. On January 1st on CNN. Max, thank you so much. And we are going to play Are You Ready?, which is the new song from Crystal Penny that was co-written by Max Szadek.
Thank you so much. I just want to reiterate again, like, if people love to listen to Luther's music, they need to listen to their body and take precautionary measures to keep their house a home. I think that's such an important message for new and old fans to realize. So thank you again for allowing me this opportunity.
Max, it's Rhythm and Soul Radio.